What is this magic? What is this sorcery? I don't know if any of you are familiar with Sun Ra, but Sun Ra has said many things, and one thing he said was, people have a lot more of the unknown than the known in their minds. The unknown is great. It just happens. And it's so true. It just happens if you let it. And that's where we're going to go with this today. But first, WTF is synthesis? A sine wave is just a voltage that rises smoothly and falls smoothly and does it over and over again and does it so fast that you hear it. Sine waves are round. They're dull, you know? They're not bright. Like a wave that is brighter is this shape. A wave that starts all the way up at the top, 100%, whatever 100% is, you know, whatever value, all the way, 11, if you're a Spinal Tap fan. And it drops linearly all the way down and then immediately goes all the way up. Not a smooth curve. And because of that sharp edge, the sound cuts. I actually don't have a sawtooth in here to show you, but close enough with this one, you know. These are the waves, but they're not that interesting when they're just droning. It's a little more interesting if you combine two of them. But still, this can only go so far. Let's change the volume. There are oscillators. This is an oscillator too. It's just happening in a very low frequency, so low that you can see it. This one's happening so fast, so high that you can hear it. So we're going to take that frequency and we're going to patch it into some sort of amplifier, some sort of volume control, basically, right? Let's make this louder. Hey, we have some shape. So we have the low frequency oscillator versus the audio rate oscillator. What is pretty amazing about this particular module, and I like this with most devices, and that's that you can variably change the shape of the resulting voltage that is making the volume change. Let's listen. That is a sawtooth. Hard attack and a smooth decay. Can give it a more exponential curve on the fall. I can speed it up. Almost to the point where it's audio rate. Almost sounds like a new pitch. But here's where it gets interesting. Let's take the second one. We're basically just changing the amplitude on both of these. That's called an envelope. When we take a signal from anything that says, do something. It says, bang. It says, make an event. We can patch that into the module so that the events only happen when we say bang. Now we have control over it that's not just knob-based control, LFO, low frequency oscillator control. We've turned them into envelopes. And both of these are really the two, these two are the basis of how I make music. I like to have free control over it, but I also like to have envelope control. All right, so now we have oscillators oscillating. We have a control device that is changing the volume through this amplifier. We can also change the waveform to make it bright, and affect the timbre by filtering out some of that brightness. So I can make it rounder. And brighter. Or I can make it wider. For those in the know, this is a variable width bandpass filter, which means that I can make it narrow so that it only allows through a narrow band of frequencies. And I can make it wider variably to let through everything. And I pretty much love using variable width bandpass filters. These two aren't. These two are, because they allow me to sculpt the sound the most. They give me the most sculptural control over the sound. So we're changing the timbre. We can add resonance, kind of that whistly sound. The magic happens when we then add effects. This is the stuff. If I had to only have one effect, it would be delay. Because what is happening now is the phasing effect that composer Steve Reich utilized, except he wasn't using a device. He would have a person sing and another person sing right afterwards. This is row, row, row your boat. You know, it's a round, a canon, a musical canon. You just wait a few beats and start the phrase later. That's what a delay ends up doing. Complexity has grown. What was a really simple this, that kind of cuts out at points, it gets silent, which is intentional. I'm starting with a seed that doesn't work so well on its own because the intention is to layer it upon itself. And right now we're just layering a copy of itself positioned later in time. The relationship we have is this duple triple thing, which makes for musical interaction that's a lot more interesting because those notes that are coming in through that process end up between the other notes instead of just lined right up with them. If you just put a 4 and an 8 together, it's okay. They're all just going to be hitting together, you know? But if you put the 3s against the 4s, they're going to do one of these and it just gets great. I'm taking a musical seed that is pretty much not great. I wouldn't listen to it. But once it gets abstracted over a few levels, and those levels come together, the interest starts to happen. And that is the primary philosophy of how I make all this stuff work, what I do with this. So we're hearing a copy, a 1-to-1 copy, and a 2-to-1 copy, and then we're having, you know, a 4-to-6 relationship and a 4-to-3 relationship. The machine is generating inspiration. The interesting thing about modular is that you don't always have to feel inspired to start making music. Inspiration can come in the form of a question. I just ask myself, well, what would happen if I did this? Oh, what would it sound like if I patched this into this? It's an experimental approach. And then, where the magic actually happens is when I just let go and listen and wait, and the music starts to be delivered to me. That's a relationship with music that didn't happen with piano, didn't happen with guitar. Rather, it happened, but it happened in these rare moments, and they usually happened in a group setting. I'm improvising with other people, and that's the inspiration generating machine, you know, real-time improvisation with other musicians. But this machine, at its peak moments, it feels like it is making choices for me. It's making musical choices. And my job then is just to stay agile enough to notice and to do something about it. And so what I do is I build systems that generate the result. My focus is on the system, is on, well, how could I organize this? You know, what do I want to be able to do? What scales do I want to use? What keys do I want to have available? What rhythms and rhythmic relationships do I want to have available? I'm setting these boundaries in advance so that I can have the freedom to explore and not have everything on my shoulders. I don't have to take care of everything. You know, like when you play an instrument, what do? You practice for years to have access to all of those scales and keys and harmonic relationships and rhythmic relationships. And it helps to have that in you when you make it with this. But to an extent, some of it is set up for you if you just prepare it in advance. And so all of this is what I call generative, I don't have the next word, composition, improvisation, music making. Bandcamp asked me recently about generative electronic music, and I quoted Brian Eno. My topic is the shift from architect to gardener, where architect stands for someone who carries a full picture of the work before it is made, to gardener standing for someone who plants seeds and waits to see exactly what will come up. It's a beautiful thing, this generative process, because you can leave the patch running all day and just pay attention to it when you want. The relationship between making and experiencing is fluid. That is what the modular synthesizer has brought into my life that the guitar never was. The guitar was always a doing. The piano was always a doing. I'm the maker. The fact that I'm listening as much or probably more than I'm doing. As you're sitting with the thing and just listening, depending on how you've set up the processes, it begins to feel like it's alive, like a collaboration, like it's making the decisions. There are things you can do to make it more generative. And that's number one, the use of random voltage. If you look up the Krell patch, K-R-E-L-L, by Todd Barton, it's like an organism. He makes an organism with the patch. So it can get really wild when you use random, but it can also get quite pretty nice if you wrangle it. And what the wrangling is the use of attenuation and offset. And what those are if you have a voltage that is randomly moving between 0 and 100, and you never know where it's going to go in there, it can get pretty wild if you're plugging it into, I don't know, a pitch of something. But if you attenuate that so that the highest value is now at 10, and it's now just 0 to 10 instead of 0 to 100, and then maybe you don't want it to be 0 to 10, you want to offset it. So that's like around 5 to 6, you know? Like that's your sweet spot. You find that sweet spot. And when you're doing this, it's not a brain thing. You're just turning the knob and listening. And eventually it hits this point. You don't even have to think. Like it's like meditative. You turn it and you find it, and then you're like, oh, that's it. That's the place. And you move on, you know, and then you probably turn it again at some point. Because remember, you're leaving the patch running all day, right? So you're taking your time with this. You're not really forcing anything. some of the more advanced techniques, I guess, of what I'm doing have to do with bringing simple things in and doing things to those simple things to get the complex things out. And that's sort of what we talked about with this. The rhythm makers and the notes makers are decoupled. They're separate. If you make them different lengths, they'll phase upon one another. So you can make extremely long sequences by just putting together things in this more algorithmic way. What am I controlling when I play? There are primary parameters of music, melody and harmony and rhythm are kind of the main things. You know, the melody, the scale, the musical contour, the way notes move up and down in pitch. Whereas the rhythm is where those note events happen across time and, you know, how they're spaced out in some sort of pleasing way. And then the harmony being the interaction of those melodic events, that the way they come together. There are secondary parameters that I tend to shape more when I play, and that is the density of events over time. You know, multiple scales of time. The density on the small, density over the larger piece of music, right? The register, the octave, the high, low, mid, you know, high, mid, low, like soprano, alto, tenor, bass, that kind of idea. I think of, you know, let's say we have what's happening right now, right? And let's just change the octave. It means something different musically now. Vibe that out. Same notes. Feels very different to me. Has an emotional component that's very different. So these are the things, the parameters that I can easily grip, you know? The timbre, the textural quality, the articulation, the envelope, right? The shape of textural quality over time, the shape of the volume over time, the ADSR, the attack, the decay, the sustain, the release. That's the envelope talk. These are the things that are very easy to then change, and I tend to change them in real time with my hands, whereas I allow those primary parameters a little less hands-on control and a little more machine control. And doing this really just allows me to turn my focus when playing toward orchestration and arrangement. I'm not caught up in every single musical decision because I've planned those in advance. Somewhat, you know, I've planned cells in advance that will be combined in a who knows how until I go and I do it. And so the point then is to build a system that defines enough boundaries that I can freely explore without falling on my face. And really, it all comes down to trust. Because the music will emerge. And if I try to impose too much of my own will on it, this thing doesn't comply. It's a wild card. And that's why I've got to embrace the unknown. So, yeah, let's make some music. Let's chill out to some music.